Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Hell was not what Carl had expected. There were no burning lakes of fire, no sulphurous winds howling across endless plains of torment. No, hell was worse than that. It was silent, silent and cold, as if the absence of sound itself was part of the punishment. The air clung to his skin like damp cloth, thick and oppressive, making it hard to breathe. In the dim light, Carl could barely make out the jagged walls of his cell, carved from some unholy stone that glistened with moisture and malice. He had been a knight once. His life had been defined by duty, honor, and the weight of a sword in his hand. Now, he was a shadow of that man. The chains that bound him rattled as he shifted in the dark, each movement a reminder of his failure. His wrists and ankles bore the raw, bloody marks of their eternal grip, their weight a constant burden that sapped his strength and will. Carl stared at the walls, his thoughts drifting back to the moment of his fall. It had been pride that brought him here. He knew that now, pride in the cruel choices he had made. He had believed himself invincible, untouchable even by the gods. But hell was where the proud were broken. And broken he was. The silence was shattered by the sound of heavy footsteps. Carl didn't bother to lift his head as the door to his cell groaned open. A figure entered, tall and draped in shadows, but Carl knew who it was without looking. Zara, one of the few prisoners who still had hope here, if hope was even a word that belonged here. "You're still alive, Carl," she said, her voice low and soft, almost mocking. She knelt beside him, her dark eyes searching his face. Her appearance had always unsettled him, a mix of beauty and cruelty that spoke of a life spent dancing on the edge of danger. Zara was no ordinary soul. She had been a queen once, or so the rumors said, before her betrayal had brought her to this forsaken place. Carl grunted in response, his throat too dry to form words. Zara smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that revealed nothing of her thoughts. "I've come to offer you something," she continued, leaning closer, her voice a whisper now, like a snake coiling around its prey. "There's a group down below, in the lower levels. They're planning something a broken bar big." He didn't respond. What was the point? The very air of this place made rebellion feel like a joke, a futile effort against the inevitable. They were trapped in hell, and no amount of plotting would change that. Zara's smile faded. "You're wasting away, Carl. You were a knight once. Do you really want to die like this? Chained and forgotten?" Her words stung. Carl looked up, his bloodshot eyes meeting hers. "And what exactly do you expect me to do?" His voice was hoarse, as if it had been scraped across gravel. "There's no escaping this place." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "Not true. There are cracks in the foundation, Carl. Hell isn't as invincible as the demons would have you believe. Lucius thinks there's a way out." Lucius. The name echoed in Carl's mind like a distant memory. He had heard it whispered in the shadows, a figure of legend among the damned. If anyone could challenge the demons, it was Lucius. But Carl had stopped believing in legends a long time ago. "I'm not interested," Carl said, turning his gaze back to the wall. Zara stood, her eyes narrowing. "You're a coward," she said, her voice cold. "I thought you'd fallen, but I didn't realize how far." Carl's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He heard the rustle of Zara's cloak as she turned to leave. "Think about it," she called over her shoulder. "We won't wait forever." The door slammed shut, leaving Carl alone once more. For a long time, he didn't move. He didn't want to. He wanted to sink deeper into the darkness, to let it consume him. But Zara's words clung to him like the chains around his wrists, and no matter how much he tried, he couldn't shake them. Lucius, a rebellion. In the silence of his cell, Carl felt something stir. It was faint, barely through a flicker of something long buried beneath the weight of his guilt and shame. Hope. The next few days passed in a blur of torment. Carl was dragged from his cell for the usual routine of punishments, the demons taking sick pleasure in their work. Each lash of the whip, each burn of the brand, was a reminder of his place in this damned hierarchy. He was nothing here, just another soul to be broken. But the idea of rebellion wouldn't leave him. It gnawed at the edges of his mind, even as the pain racked his body. Zara's words echoed in his ears. We won't wait forever. One night, Carl found himself pacing in the confines of his cell, his shackles clinking softly with each step. He was restless, more so than he had been in months. No, years. How long had he been here? Time had no meaning in hell. Days, months, centuries, it all bled together in the eternal darkness. But something was changing inside him. The hopelessness that had defined his existence here was beginning to crack. He found himself thinking back to his life before, to the man he had been, the knight, the warrior. He had been proud, yes, but he had also been strong. He had fought for something, once. And now, for the first time in a long time, Carl felt the stirrings of that strength again. The next time Zara came, Carl was ready. I'll join you, he said before she could speak, his voice steady despite the weight of the decision. Take me to Lucius. Zara's smile returned, though this time there was no mockery in it. I knew you had some fight left in you, she said. Come, there's much to do. The lower levels of the prison were worse than Carl could have imagined. The deeper they descended, the darker and colder it became. The air grew thick with a scent of rot and despair, and the wails of the damned echoed through the narrow, twisting corridors like the cries of lost souls. Zara led the way, her movements swift and confident, as if she had made this journey many times before. Carl followed in silence, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. The demons that patrolled the upper levels didn't come down here often, but when they did, it was never good news. After what felt like hours of walking, they reached a hidden chamber deep within the bowels of the prison. The room was small, lit by flickering torches that cast eerie shadows on the walls. A group of figures stood huddled together in the center, their faces gaunt and hollowed from years of torment, but their eyes burned with a fierce determination. Lucius stood at the center of them, a tall, imposing figure with dark, piercing eyes and an air of authority that commanded respect. He was dressed in the tattered remnants of what had once been royal robes, though now they were little more than rags. His face was lined with age and suffering, but there was a strength in him that had not yet been broken. Carl, Lucius said, his voice low and steady. Zara has told me about you. Carl met his gaze, feeling a strange sense of recognition pass between them. I'm here to fight, he said simply. Lucius nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. Good. We need every able soul we can get. He turned to the others. This is Carl, a knight in his former life. He will be an asset to our cause. The group murmured their approval, though some eyes lingered on Carl with suspicion. It was clear they had been betrayed before. Lucius stepped closer to Carl, lowering his voice. We have a plan, but it is dangerous, more dangerous than anything you've faced before. If we fail, the consequences will be worse than death. Carl's jaw tightened. What do you need me to do? Lucius glanced around the room, then spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. The warden of this prison holds the key to our freedom. He possesses the chains of Dominus, a powerful artifact that binds this place together. If we can get our hands on those chains, we can break the warden's control and free ourselves. Carl listened intently, his mind racing. The warden, he had heard of the creature, a monstrous demon who ruled over the prison with an iron fist. The idea of going up against him was terrifying, but Carl pushed the fear aside. When do we start? He asked. Lucius smiled grimly. Soon. Very soon. Carl spent the following days preparing for the rebellion. Zara and the others trained him in the ways of the resistance, teaching him how to move silently through the shadows, how to strike without being seen, and how to harness the small amount of power that still lingered within him. The training was brutal, but Carl welcomed it. It gave him a sense of purpose, something to focus on other than the endless torment of hell. He was still weak, still a shadow of the man he had once been, but with each passing day, he grew stronger. Zara was always by his side, Carl spent the following days preparing for the rebellion. Zara and the others trained him in the ways of the resistance, teaching him how to move silently through the shadows, how to strike without being seen, and how to harness the small amount of power that still lingered within him. The training was brutal, but Carl welcomed it. It gave him a sense of purpose, something to focus on other than the endless torment of hell. He was still weak, still a shadow of the man he had once been, but with each passing day, he grew stronger. Zara was always by his side, guiding him through the harsh regimen. Her presence was a constant reminder of what they were fighting for: a chance at redemption, a way to break free from the eternal chains that bound them. Her eyes, dark and determined, never wavered from the goal they all shared. One evening, as the crimson sun dipped below the horizon of Hell's prison, casting long, twisted shadows across the barren landscape, Lucius called the group together. The time for planning had passed, now it was time for action. "We move at midnight," Lucius announced, his voice steady and commanding. "We have intel that the warden's chamber will be less guarded tonight. It's our best chance to seize the chains of Dominus." Carl felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the culmination of weeks of training and strategizing. He glanced around at the faces of his fellow rebels, each one etched with determination and fear. They all knew the risks, but none were willing to back down now. The group moved swiftly through the lower levels, navigating the labyrinthine corridors with practiced ease. The air grew colder and the walls more oppressive as they descended deeper into the prison's bowels. The further they went, the more they could feel the malevolent presence of the demons lurking in the shadows, waiting for any sign of rebellion. As they approached the warden's chamber, the atmosphere thickened with tension. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their grotesque forms twisted by demonic influence. Carl could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he pushed the fear aside, focusing on the mission ahead. Zara signaled for silence, and the group halted just outside the chamber's entrance. Lucius stepped forward, his expression resolute. "Remember, our objective is the chains of Dominus. We need to disable the warden's control and take the chains without raising an alarm." Carl nodded, his grip tightening around the hilt of his sword, a relic from his past life, now infused with the faint remnants of divine power. He took a deep breath, drawing strength from the memories of who he had been and who he still aspired to be. With a swift motion, Lucius signaled the advance. The rebels moved like shadows, slipping past the guards with practiced precision. Carl followed closely behind, his senses heightened, every sound and movement amplified in the oppressive silence of hell. They reached the chamber door, guarded by two imposing demons. Lucius stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "We come to negotiate." The demons sneered, their eyes glowing with infernal light. "No negotiations here, only compliance or punishment." Before the situation could escalate, Zara sprang into action, her movements fluid and deadly. She engaged the guards with a grace that belied the ferocity of her attacks, disarming and incapacitating them with ease. The others followed suit, neutralizing any threat with swift efficiency. Carl stepped into the chamber, his eyes fixed on the center where the chains of Dominus were displayed. The artifact was a massive set of chains, pulsating with dark energy, suspended above a pedestal bathed in an eerie, otherworldly light. It was both beautiful and terrifying, the very essence of Hell's power contained within its links. But as they moved to secure the chains, the warden himself appeared, a towering figure of nightmarish proportions. His presence was overwhelming, radiating an aura of pure malevolence. His eyes bore into Carl's soul, recognizing the spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. "So, the rebels have finally arrived," the warden intoned, his voice echoing through the chamber like the tolling of a death knell. "You dare challenge my authority, you will all suffer the consequences." Lucius stepped forward, meeting the warden's gaze without flinching. "We no longer accept your tyranny. It ends tonight." The warden laughed, a sound that sent shivers down everyone's spine. "Foolish mortals, you cannot hope to defeat me." Without warning, the chamber erupted into chaos, Demonic forces poured in from every corner, their eyes fixed on the rebels with lethal intent. The battle was fierce, a whirlwind of steel and dark magic. Carl fought with a ferocity he hadn't felt in years, his training with the rebellion paying off as he parried blows and struck back with deadly precision. Tsar removed like a shadow, taking down demons with graceful efficiency, while Lucius coordinated the defense, ensuring that their formation remained intact despite the onslaught. The chamber became a battleground, the air thick with the scent of brimstone and the sounds of clashing weapons. Amidst the chaos, Carl made his way to the chains of Dominus. He could feel their dark energy pulsing, a malevolent force that seemed to resonate with his very being. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold metal, and felt a surge of power course through him. It was as if the chains themselves recognized his presence, acknowledging his intent to break free. The warden advanced, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You think you can control the chains? They are the very essence of hell." Carl met the warden's gaze, his resolve unshaken. "I don't want to control them, I want to destroy them." With a fierce determination, Carl grasped the chains firmly, channeling the divine power that had lain dormant within him. Light began to emanate from his sword, cutting through the darkness that surrounded them. The chains responded, their dark energy clashing with the newfound light. The warden roared, unleashing a torrent of dark magic towards Carl. But Carl stood his ground, the light from his sword forming a barrier that repelled the attacks. He focused on the chains, drawing upon every ounce of strength and willpowers he possessed. As the battle raged on, the other rebels fought valiantly, holding off the demonic forces long enough for Carl to complete his task. The chains of Dominus began to crack under the pressure of the divine light, their dark energy disintegrating into nothingness. The warden staggered, his power waning as the chain's destruction weakened his control over the prison. With a final, desperate effort, Carl unleashed the full extent of his power. The chains shattered, releasing a blinding explosion of light that engulfed the chamber. The dark magic that had once held the prison together was obliterated, and the warden let out a final, anguished scream as his form dissipated into the ether. The chamber began to crumble, the foundations of hell itself shaking under the impact of the rebellion's victory. The rebels seized the opportunity, fighting their way through the collapsing prison with a renewed sense of hope. Carl led the charge, his spirit buoyed by the knowledge that they had a chance at freedom. As they ascended through the ruins of hell, the air grew lighter, the oppressive darkness lifting bit by bit. The gates of hell loomed ahead, guarded by the last remnants of demonic forces. But with the chains of Dominus destroyed, the guards faltered, their power broken. Carl felt a surge of triumph as they reached the gates. The path to freedom was within their grasp. But as they prepared to leave, Lucius turned to him, a solemn expression on his face. "We did it, Carl. But there's still one final challenge." Carl followed Lucius's gaze to the gates, where a figure stood waiting. It was the warden's lieutenant, a formidable demon who had remained loyal until the end. "You may have defeated the warden, but you cannot escape hell itself," the demon sneered. "There is always a price to pay for defying the infernal order." Lucius stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "We are willing to pay whatever price is necessary to secure our freedom." The demon laughed, a sound that echoed ominously. "Very well. To leave hell, one of you must remain behind, sealing the gates and ensuring that no one else can follow. It is a sacrifice that must be made." Carl felt a pang of fear and uncertainty. The thought of leaving his comrades behind was unbearable, but he knew that the alternative was no better. To ensure the freedom of all the souls in the prison, someone had to take on the burden of sealing hell forever. He looked around at the faces of his fellow rebels, each one worn and battle-hardened, but resolute. They had all fought valiantly, and none wanted to leave behind those who had sacrificed so much. Yet, the reality was clear: without someone to seal the gates, hell would continue to torment the souls within. Carl took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He thought of his past, of the honor and duty that had defined him as a knight. This was his chance at redemption, a way to atone for his sins and failures. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I'll stay behind and seal the gates. It's the least I can do after everything." Zara stepped forward, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of sorrow and pride. "Are you sure, Carl? There must be another way." He shook his head. This is the only way to ensure that no one else suffers as we have. It's my burden to bear." Lucius placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your sacrifice will not be in vain. You've given us all a chance at freedom. We will never forget what you've done." With a final nod, Carl turned to face the gates of hell. The demon guardian loomed before him, its eyes burning with a mixture of respect and disdain. "Seal the gates," Carl commanded, stepping into the light that emanated from the gates. The demon raised its hand, and dark energy swirled around Carl. But instead of fear, Carl felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. As the chains of hell began to bind him, he drew upon the divine power that had saved him, channeling it into the act of sealing the gates. A brilliant light enveloped the chamber, and Carl felt his spirit lifting, transcending the physical realm of hell. The other rebels watched in awe and sorrow as their leader sacrificed himself to ensure their freedom. One by one, they stepped through the gates, leaving behind the torment and darkness that had held them captive for so long. As Carl's spirit ascended, he looked back one last time, seeing the faces of his comrades disappearing into the light. There was no regret, only a deep sense of fulfillment. He had found his redemption, and in doing so, had given others the chance to find theirs. The gates of hell sealed shut behind him, the darkness receding and giving way to a new dawn. The freed souls emerged into the world above, their spirits unburdened by the chains of their past sins. They looked to the sky with hope, ready to rebuild their lives and seek forgiveness for the wrongs they had committed. Carl's sacrifice had not been in vain. The prison of hell was no more, and with it, the cycle of eternal torment was broken. The world above would remember the tale of the fallen knight who rose to lead a rebellion, ultimately giving his life to ensure that no soul would ever be trapped in hell again. As the freed souls dispersed, Zara lingered for a moment, her eyes searching the heavens. She whispered a silent prayer for Carl, honoring his memory and the legacy he had left behind. With a final glance, she turned and walked away, ready to embrace the future that Carl had helped secure. And so, the story of Hell Prison came to an end, not with an explosion of fire and brimstone, but with the quiet strength of a man who found redemption in the most unlikely of places. Carl's spirit soared, free at last, knowing that his sacrifice had brought light to the darkest of realms and hope to those who had lost it long ago.